I don't think there's any question. This is the biggest game in the Big Ten to date. We've got number 3 and we've got number 4 getting together. This has been a tremendous matchup in the conference in recent years, but not been quite this much on the line in regards to record rankings, college football playoff appearances, potentially down the road as two 5-0 Big Ten powers get together at Kinnick Stadium on Saturday. We got Corey Brad on the line from the Hawkeye of the Storm, joins us on a regular basis and anchors our coverage on our Iowa channel here at the Voice of College Football. And again, join Corey on from the Hawkeye of the Storm, and also Tim Aiden from Black Shoe Diaries on SB Nation. Gentlemen, how are we doing tonight?
Doing good, Mark. This is a great week. I think Penn State's probably been involved in more of these top 5 matchups than Iowa has, but I know we've seen some numbers from the Big Ten Network this week that it is very rare that you get a Big Ten matchup without the likes of Ohio State, a top 5 Big Ten matchup without the likes of Ohio State and Michigan. So hopefully Big Ten fans in general enjoy this. I know I'm excited, and I'm sure Tim feels the same way.
Yeah, just like Corey said, I've also been looking forward, had this circled in the calendar for the last week or two. And like Corey said, I've been following college football for almost like 30 years now, since I was a little kid. And I'm trying to remember the last time that Penn State played another Big Ten team not named Ohio State. And it was actually, you know what? I think now I remember, it was 1997. They hosted Michigan. That was when Michigan had Charles Woodson, Brian Griese at quarterback. They had, one of the best defenses I've, ever seen in my lifetime. I think they were only allowing like 9 points per game, something ridiculous. But I was actually, I think 13-year-old me was at that game. And I think it was part of what they called Judgment Day, because I think they were number 2 and number 4 respectively, Penn State and Michigan. And then you had number 1 Florida State and number 3 UNC playing that same day as well. So I remember College Game Day dubbing it Judgment Day. But anyway, Michigan came out and just demolished Penn State. The difference in athleticism between the two teams was just night and day. I mean, that Michigan team went on to win a national championship. But anyway, I'm thinking this Saturday's matchup is going to be a little more competitive than that. You got two tremendous defenses in Iowa and in Penn State going up against each other. I very much anticipate it's going to be a rock fight, not unlike Penn State's season opener at Wisconsin, that 16-10 final score. So, and what I'm curious to see really is, I think all the talk about Iowa's defense, especially, is how many turnovers they're forcing. They've got 15, I believe, 12 interceptions, 3 fumble recoveries. I'm sure Corey can correct me if I'm wrong on that. But they're averaging about 3 turnovers a game, which is just an absolutely torrid pace. One which is probably not sustainable over the course of a season. Now, the question is, does that come down to earth a little bit starting this Saturday, or can they keep that up for another game this week? If they're able to keep at or near that pace, I like Iowa's chances to win, but if Penn State's able to, take care of the ball like they've been doing this season so far, I think I like Penn State's chances in that case. But either way, it's going to be. I'm really looking forward to that 4D chess match between Mike Yursich and Phil Parker.
We also have Marty Leap joining us from SB Nation's Black Shoe Diaries as well to gang up on Corey, I guess, tonight. Marty,
I wasn't aware of this, Marty. So you kind of joined, and that's all right. 1-on-2, I'm used to it in Iowa. So good to see you.
Good to see you. How's it going?
It's going good. We were just talking about how historical this matchup, and I know Tim talked about kind of the history with Penn State and Michigan, right? Right, Tim?
Yep.
1987.
1997.
97. So the last big game, people are equating here in the state of Iowa this week. People are really equating this game to Iowa-Michigan 1985, which was, of course, 1 versus 2, which I'm sure Mark remembers fondly because It was, what's that?
12-10.
That's right. And Rob Houtland was the savior, the saving grace that day with his famous kick. And but yeah, it's been that long since Iowa's had a top 5 matchup in the Big Ten. So it's exciting on a lot of fronts. I know, of course, Big Noon will be there with Fox, and Bob Stoops will be there, who's obviously an Iowa guy. And yeah, there's a lot of interesting storylines, and maybe we can get Marty's perspective on this too. But I've seen a lot of people this week want to break down battles and positions, and of course, I think most fans are biased when they're doing this. But one thing that I think fans need to be careful of is doing that and thinking that you're going to be able to predict a feasible outcome based on that. I use the example of Wisconsin, Penn State. I look at Penn State and Wisconsin, and to me, Penn State's better defensively, although it's close. To me, they're much better offensively. There's not even a question. And they're probably around the same special teams wise, but that game was close. It came down to one score. Penn State very easily could have lost that game. So, Iowa's offense has improved. I'm not saying that they're a juggernaut. I'm not saying they're going to score in the 50s like they did against Maryland this past week. And I for the record, I think Penn State's defense is far and above better than Maryland's. But I do think sometimes in a game like this, with as much hype as there is, I think of other Big Ten games, Iowa, Nebraska every year is always close, despite the fact that Iowa's usually leaps and bounds better. You just never know, and Big Ten football, college football in general, is unpredictable. So maybe Marty can give us his insight as far as positions that maybe will make a major difference.
Yeah, I know one thing that I'm really going to be watching in this game, I think will be very important for Penn State. And this is something we saw them do a lot against Auburn. I know Iowa is a defense that likes to rotate a lot of guys in their front 7. Against Auburn, a lot of times we saw Penn State take advantage of that deep tight end group with Brenton Strange, with Theo Johnson, with Tyler Warren, to be able to bounce from 12 personnel out to 11 personnel, basically by taking one of those tight ends and putting them out in the slot. So you can go to that 3 wide set and take advantage of having these tight ends who are great receivers without giving the defense the opportunity to sub. And against Auburn, whenever Penn State's offense kind of got stuck in a little bit of a rut, we would see them go to that with a lot of success because they were able to go to their tempo offense without allowing the Tigers to sub. And I think that is something I would really like to see Penn State do on Saturday to prevent Iowa from subbing as often as they like to in the front 7. And I also think in general, just from what I've seen from Iowa this year and some of the things I have heard, his name is escaping my mind at the moment. I apologize for that, but Iowa's 247 writer, I was listening to a podcast he was on earlier in the week, and he said that he thinks Penn State's tight ends against Iowa's linebackers could be a real advantage for the Nittany Lions in the passing game. So when you combine those two things, I'd really like to see the Nittany Lions use those tight ends on Saturday afternoon and see if that can help spark this offense. Because I have no doubts, like you guys said, I think this definitely has rock fight potential to it. 2 defenses that might be top 5 to top 10 nationally, 2 offenses that while they have had plenty of success, you still have a lot of questions about them, especially the quarterbacks. So I think every little thing on offense can make a difference. And with the Nittany Lions, I really do think that tight end usage could be big on Saturday.
And let me just throw this in, Mark, and maybe we can get back to Tim. But I always defer to Coach Don Patterson, who joins us during our post-game show, because he's obviously the expert between the two of us. And I had a conversation with him last night, and when he does analytics for Kirk Ferentz still, and so he studies each and every game for every opponent that Iowa faces. So he was looking at the tape from Saturday, Indiana, Penn State, and he just had flat out said, the guy that really scares me is Dotson, and there's no question. I would go the same spot. I'm not saying that Penn State's tight ends can't hurt Iowa, but I go back to, for instance, the game against Iowa State. You could argue Iowa State has one of the best tight end groups. Certainly Levi Stevenson of SB Nation would say that their tight end group is one of the best in the country. And Iowa kept Chase Allen and whatever the big kid's name, Kolar, kept them in basically in check the entire game. Now, Iowa did struggle with the big tight end at Colorado State a couple of weeks ago. So I don't know. The good news with Phil Parker, if you're an Iowa fan and defending big tight ends, is you're used to doing that in practice every day because, of course, Iowa has kind of that pedigree of producing big tight ends who can block and who can run and who can catch. So I don't worry about that as much. Dotson's a mismatch. The good news for Iowa is they have faced elite wide receivers thus far this year. They've already faced Ty Freifogel. And of course, last week with Demas, although he was hurt early in that game. So, I'm not as worried about tight end. But I saw that comment from I believe it was Joseph Walters in the chat. Dotson is the one that scares Don, and he's probably the one that keeps me up because we've seen. I mean, thinking about past Iowa Penn State matchups and Rivals beat writer Tom Kakert and I sat down last night during my podcast, and we just talked about some of the historical games, and maybe we can talk about that at some point during our show this evening, Mark. But the history of this rivalry, big plays have been a history of this rivalry. I think back to 2000. I want to say it's 2009. Daryl Clark hit a huge play. I think first drive of the game, and that really
first
set
play of the game.
Yeah, set the tone in that game. Now Iowa came back to win, but again, it was because of a huge play from Adrian Claiborne, special teams blocking a punt. So big plays are always big in this rivalry, and partially because they tend to be low-scoring games.
Iowa, Penn State, 3-4 in the country, both 5-0. Both have taken on sizable schedules to date. So we're only 5 weeks into the college football season. There are a few examples across the country of teams that have arrived at week 6 undefeated, but their competition could be in question. Not so with these two teams. Iowa right out of the gate, we knew with Iowa State and with Indiana that there would be some resistance there. Indiana has obviously not quite turned out to be the team that we anticipated. Iowa State also to a degree, but Iowa also with a Friday night road challenge at Maryland that turned out to not be so much of a challenge. They annihilated the Terps 51-14. And for Penn State, it was that Big Ten scheduling, really wanting to get some power brokers together in week 1 as they did with Ohio State, Minnesota, and especially with Penn State and Wisconsin, Iowa, and Indiana. And so, of course, Penn State with a big challenge at Camp Randall right out of the gate. Outplayed, I thought, in the first half, proved to be the better team, made the big defensive plays, and, of course, hit for the bomb. And now with the win over Auburn, that's looking better. Auburn continues to win. They beat LSU this past Saturday night. And we've got the one common opponent in Indiana. I don't know that we really can separate the dominance of the two performances. Iowa came right out with the haymaker right out of the gate with the pick 6 and the long touchdown run by Goodson. And it was over like that. More of a slow grind to Penn State's dominance, 24-0. So they've both taken on Indiana, and here we are. I think both teams are surely battle-tested at this point, and that would be a little bit more than I would say for a couple other unbeaten teams around the country, and even in the Big Ten with Michigan and Michigan State. I don't know if you guys can gain anything as you look at it. Maybe I'll start with you, Tim, in the Indiana game versus what Iowa was able to do against the Hoosiers, if you think anything is relevant there.
I mean, really it seems both teams, I think the one common thing is that both teams' defenses really made work of Indiana's offense. I mean, as you met, Iowa had, I think they had 2 pick sixes, I believe, right, Corey?
Yeah, Riley Moss had both of them.
2 pick 6, yeah, 2 pick sixes, which, for any team to do that's ridiculous. But both teams just absolutely dominated. Of course, Penn State shut out. Iowa held them to just 6 points. In the season opener when Indiana, as I think we all know, for the whole summer, I can remember reading it was either Bruce Feldman or Stuart Mandel in The Athletic, but one of them had like Indiana as 3rd, and they had Michigan like 4th or 5th in the East. Like they were, but now it looks like, at the very least, looks like the opposite. I mean, Michigan, of course, we'll talk about that another time, but there was definitely all this hype about Indiana, and then Iowa comes out and pummels them, and then they drop another one at Cincinnati. But that was a game they went up 14-0, and then Cincy came back and beat them. So we weren't quite sure how Penn State would handle them, but to their credit, I mean they did what a top-notch defense should do to that Indiana team, that offense, and really hold them in check. Now, I didn't expect a shutout. My prediction was 35-17, so you can call me really impressed. But I think that's one thing they shared in common. Obviously Iowa put up more points, but granted, 14 of those came off of pick sixes. Penn State had all of Penn State's points came off offense, special teams. So I mean, it's about the same there. I mean, it's really hard to say based on their performance in Indiana who would have the edge. I mean, again, I think it's going to come. I guess I'm sounding like Captain Obvious here, but it's going to come down to whichever team takes care of the ball better on Saturday, especially for Penn State. They absolutely can't allow Iowa to continue its torrid pace of getting turnovers on the opponent's side of the field, and just having to go 40-ish yards or less to the end zone. And I noticed somebody in the Black Shoe Diary Slack channel shared with me a statistic today, and Iowa's average starting field position was at their own 38, which is far and away the best right now in FBS. So I mean, you think about on average, they only have to go 62 yards to get to the end zone, which is ridiculous. And I think Penn State's going to go in there and pull off the win Saturday. They're going to need to make sure, obviously, take care of the ball. But the other aspect, I think Corey alluded to it earlier, special teams. Jordan Stout, he's been tremendous for Penn State, not just on kickoffs, in which all but one of his kickoffs have gone for touchbacks so far, and the one that didn't went out of bounds. So Penn State doesn't even have to defend a kickoff return. More importantly, punting, he's been crushing it, whether it's booming a 50-plus yarder or if he's just trying to pin an opponent inside their own 20. He's been pretty stellar at that. In fact, he was named the Ray Guy punter of the week, either for the Big Ten or nationally, I forget, but I know he was named a punter of the week for his performance against Indiana. So it's really going to be very important that Jordan Stout is able, with the field position balance, able to flip the field and make Iowa have to go 75, 80, 90 yards even to reach the end zone. And, so Iowa hasn't been, in that way, they haven't been tested in terms of whether their offense can consistently march that far down the field and rack up points. Now, maybe they're capable of doing it, but we just don't know because their defense has played so well. They've been creating short fields for that offense.
Anything on special teams, Corey? Because we get the question below, and Tim certainly addressed it from the Penn State side. How would you rate Iowa's performance through 5 games?
Well, it's hard for me to compare because as far as punter is concerned, I guess we can compare. Iowa has one of the best punters in the country. I'm not doubting that Penn State doesn't either. That certainly changes the field position conversation because you're absolutely right, Tim. That has been huge. Iowa's elite everywhere on special teams. Now, I don't want to start sounding like I'm writing Penn State off in this game, but they are elite at every position. Charlie Jones is probably the best punt / kick. Well, at least punt return. I mean, Amir Smith-Marset was pretty elite returning kicks, but as far as punt returning, Charlie Jones is elite at punt return. Probably, I don't want to say in the Kirk Ferentz era, but it's pretty close. I don't know who I would. Obviously, Tim Dwight, but that goes back into the Hayden era. He is that good. Now, again, that can be neutralized if you're punting out of bounds or you're punting for touchbacks on kickoffs. Iowa's kicker has been very underrated. He's a guy who's a super senior who actually got brought up in our post game the other day because I think he's one of the more underrated contributors that we've seen so far because he's really not missing kicks and he's hitting from every spot on the field. And he's doing the same on kickoffs as well. So that will be an interesting battle. It very well could come down to special teams. Again, I brought up 2009 and the difference in that game. Darryl Clark hits who did he hit, Tim, on the big touchdown? Who was the wide receiver that Darryl Clark hit on that first play?
That was that was Chaz Powell.
Chaz Powell,
yeah.
You got it. There it is. Yep. Good job on that. And so that changed things early, but what changed things late was Adrian Claiborne destroying a coverage guy. He wasn't an offensive lineman. Whoever he was that he ran through was a lot smaller than Adrian Claiborne. And he, of course, blocked it, scooped, and scored. And that was the difference. Iowa did tack on a late score in that one, and I believe a field goal. But, yeah, special teams are always huge. I think back to 2017. Saquon Barkley runs all over the field against Iowa. But again, what did it come down to? Anthony Nelson blocks a huge field goal kick to keep Iowa in it. A couple big plays from Akram Wadley. And then, yeah, the long drive at the end was kind of obviously that's what won it. But up until that point, there really weren't any long sustained drives for either team that ended up in touchdowns. Iowa likes to play the bend, don't break. So if you break them early in a drive, that does change things. So I have no doubt that Sean Clifford in this offense, Franklin's going to have something tuned up, dialed up for Dotson. Special teams are going to be, I think, pretty even. I will say this as it relates to that question about comparing Penn State's win against Indiana and Iowa's win against Indiana. No disrespect to that question, but that means absolutely nothing in my mind. It just means absolutely zilch. We saw Iowa struggle to beat Colorado State, who'd lost to South Dakota State, and Vanderbilt, who's maybe worse than Kansas. And yet then they come back and they just destroy Maryland on the road. So I've gotten in that trap of trying to compare wins and losses, and I just think it means very little. I will say this, to jump the gun here, and again, we don't have to make our predictions right now. For Iowa fans who are listening, I am more confident that Iowa is going to win this game this weekend than I was that Iowa was going to beat Maryland last week. And we can talk about why specifically, but that no disrespect to Penn State. I think Penn State's a better team, but I do believe that I'm more confident in that from what we've seen last week. And maybe Marty can chime in here too. I don't want to leave him out of the conversation.
Yeah, no. Well, with the confidence thing, I will say when we made our preseason picks on Black Sheet Diaries, I picked Penn State to go 9-3, and one of those 3 losses was Iowa. Right now, I feel 100 times more confident in Penn State's ability to win this game than they did preseason. I also had Wisconsin as one of those 3 losses. So, I think Penn State definitely has outperformed my expectations, probably has outperformed the expectations of most Penn State fans through 5 weeks, especially Sean Clifford. Yeah, Tim, I know you as well. I think we both had him at 9-3. So, and I think it all starts with Sean Clifford. He's been a totally different quarterback this season. Even last week against Indiana, he started slow, and there were a couple times in that game where you thought, oh no, here we go. It's the old Sean Clifford. And to his credit, he bounced back and made some big throws when he needed to. And, I think Clifford deserves a lot of credit for that. Obviously, new offense coordinator / quarterback coach Mike Yurcich deserves a lot of credit for that. But if Penn State can come out on Saturday afternoon and get the Sean Clifford that they've gotten basically since halftime against Wisconsin, that will go a long way towards an Nittany Lion victory. And the way Clifford has played this year is a big reason why this has gone from a game where preseason I had no doubts that Nittany Lions would lose to now feeling much more confident in their ability to go into Kinnick Stadium and walk away victorious on Saturday.
Yeah, I agree with what Marty just said.
Iowa, Penn State, huge matchup in the Big Ten. Number 3, number 4, 2 of the 4 undefeated teams in the conference, along with Michigan State. As we start to really get into the teeth of the Big Ten schedule, and it should be a fascinating game. It should be a fascinating race, as I think from my conversations with all of you, we're pretty confident that this conference is pretty well stacked. It's a strong conference, and it's not just from playing weaklings outside of the conference or any kind of facade, that this is a very strong conference, 4, 5, 6 teams heavy at the top, and the Eastern Division race in particular should be fascinating. The West could be fascinating, but Iowa could just flat out run away with it. That is certainly a possibility. Corey Timmett made reference a few times early to the sustainability of the turnovers, which what's funny is that we're having the same conversation last week, in the week before, and the week before, and the week before, and the week before, but specifically last week before the Maryland game, talking about, well, is this sustainable? It wasn't just sustainable. It was increased exponentially to 7 turnovers against Maryland. I don't think there's any question that the rate of turnovers is higher than it usually is. but is it
Sure.
sustainable? Well, of course it is, because Iowa's been doing it for 20 years. So they obviously practice it, scheme for it, all of that. It's in their DNA.
Yeah, and the thing about it is, early in the season, we had those conversations. I remember the particular live. It was going into the Kent State game, and you and I sat down during the middle of the week and just talked about Iowa's win against Indiana, Iowa's win against Iowa State. And, I kind of danced that line because, the homer in me wanted to believe that those kinds of numbers are sustainable. But I'll just be honest, for anybody that heard me, I was not very, at the time, I was very doubtful internally. I really did feel, and I am sort of, I get very, I can be, if I'm not careful, I can become somewhat of a pessimist as it relates to Iowa football and expectations, because I think a lot of Iowa fans are that way, because we have gotten burned in big games over the past, 20 years. But I'll be honest, you watch what Iowa did against Indiana, you watch what they did against Iowa State, you watch what they did against Maryland. Okay, now we've got three examples against every Power 5 team they've played where they've done the exact same thing. And that is not only forced turnovers, but forced turnovers at a high volume. Last week you have 6 interceptions, and they're all by different players. I mean, I don't know. I haven't looked at the numbers, or I don't even know how you'd research a stat like that, but I wonder when the last time that's happened in the FBS. That just doesn't happen. I was doing very unique things with this defense. Tom Kakert described last night on my show, Phil Parker is confusing the heck out of a lot of quarterbacks and a lot of offensive coordinators. And I'm not doubtful that James Franklin in this offense will be able to put up some points. But I'll be honest, I have not been a Clifford believer. I think he's one of the best quarterbacks in the Big Ten this year, because it's just not a real strong year as far as the quarterback is concerned. I mean, Don and I were running through this last year. Like, who do you put ahead of Clifford? Maybe CJ Stroud. McNamara's been okay. Adrian Martinez may even be in the conversation. But when's the last time we've even considered putting a guy like Adrian Martinez, who's got a team that, can't beat anybody besides Northwestern, in that conversation? So I'm not a big fan of Clifford. And even though he has the ability to get the ball downfield, he has shown over the course of his career that he is liable to make a mistake at some point. I mean, he just is. Last year we saw it. I know they were a different team last year, but we saw that against Iowa last year. I don't know how many turnovers. Don't have that stat in front of me, but that game, certainly the memorable interception was the Davion Nixon return, and then the Euro step return for a touchdown in that game. So I see Iowa forcing turnovers. They've got too many guys. I mean, you look at that back end, and I said it going into the season. What normally worries me about this defense, because Phil Parker's defenses, let's face it, they're always good, like Mark said. But what's different about this season, and I saw it heading into the year, is they are not weak at either cornerback spot. And typically, I could name a handful of games where Iowa's had a very solid defense, but you get into these games where you actually have problems stopping. Purdue, Jeff Brom has been great at taking advantage of this issue at Iowa, because Iowa typically has one elite corner and then one guy that's okay. And because of Iowa's, Phil Parker doesn't like to send the guy from the wide side of the field to the short side of the field and switch back and forth. And so you just line up your best receiver on Iowa's weak side of the field and burn them time and time again. But Iowa doesn't have that issue this year, because I think Riley Moss and Matt Hankins, I think Hankins is slightly better, but they're both solid. And then you have a guy, we saw Terry Roberts really take a step forward last week. And Kirk basically said during his weekly press conference that the guy's a starter and he's just on the bench because he's got 2 pros ahead of him. So I don't worry nearly as much as I have in past years. Again, Dotson still scares me because he's just that good. I think he's number 1 on Todd McShay's big board for wide receivers. So that tells you something. I would rank him ahead of Freifogel. I'd rank him ahead of the guy Demas. I don't know if I'd rank him ahead of Bell, but he's definitely right up there for best in the Big Ten, one of the best in the country. So, it's going to be interesting to see if they can hit that big play. I mean, that's just, again, it just seems like this series always comes down to that. And I think back to another game that stands out in my mind. 2018 was a year where, you have another rainy game in Happy Valley, which it seems like every time Iowa plays Penn State there, it's raining or it's, misting or whatever. And it came down to the end of the game, which it normally does in this series. Nate Stanley throws a terrible interception, probably a bad play call on the part of Brian Ferentz, and that kind of sealed the deal. But again, a low-scoring game. I think back to a play in that game, had T.J. Hawkinson, no one around him, 10 yards down the field on a play-action throw from Nate Stanley, and Nate Stanley airmailed it. The difference this year is Spencer Petras is not overthrowing deep routes. He's hitting wide-open receivers down the field. So there's just a lot of reasons why I'm more confident in this game than I was last week, but I guess those are a few.
And Corey's comments about Sean Clifford earlier brings me back. Kind of brings back to I wanted to answer one of the questions. I forget it was from some guy named John, but he was asking what's the difference in Sean Cliff, like how's he improved this year compared to prior years, and is he still a threat to run? I think that was a question, but the first part, I think the biggest difference is Mike Yurcich. I mean, the system that he brought in, which was highly successful at Oklahoma State, where they averaged over 40 points per game just about every year. That they bring that same system, and he and Yurcich. I think Yurcich's done a great job of, giving him. Getting him to go through his checkdowns, or giving him a. I guess I've seen some like videos of him, but he teaches his quarterbacks how to, based on how they read the safety, however they're lined up, they know which receiver to go to. But even more importantly, though, Cliff has clearly learned from looking at games like how to check down if his primary receiver is covered. In years past, I know Marty and I have talked about this ad nauseum on our own post-game shows this year, but when we're admiring how Cliff has improved. But, the big thing is in years past, Cliff would be looking, his primary guy was covered. He would, or if he felt any sort of pressure whatsoever, he would just take off and try to run, and then could sometimes get himself into trouble. Or he would scramble and then maybe just force a pass somewhere to end up as an interception or pick six instead of just, throwing the ball away. He's just done a much better job nowadays of, staying in the pocket, just looking, if his primary guy's covered, he'll look down, and he's done a great job of identifying, his checkdowns, and usually one of them ends up being open to throw it to. And so, he'll do that. Now, can he still use his legs? Oh, you bet. He showcased that last week, even this past week against Indiana. I can remember one play especially. I think Micah McFadden, Indiana star linebacker, was just racing towards him, thinking he was going to get a clean hit on him, and then Cliff just kind of sidesteps in the pocket and then just decides to take off up the middle, which is, they cleared the way for him. But he did that a few other times during the game. So, if Iowa's gonna, obviously, I'm sure they're gonna bring some pressure. But if they're gonna do it, they need to be disciplined. You got to make sure, you better get to him, because if you don't, he's gonna have a lane to run through and pick up that first down. So they very much still have to respect the run with Cliff, even though he's become a much better pocket passer. And I will say the other part too is, I know Marty and I, we've harped on, the run game, how run blocking has been lackluster so far, but the pass protection, for the most part, it's been pretty solid. They've done a great job overall of protecting Cliff, and that's also helped him out, as far as being able to stay in the pocket and look to his checkdowns. So I'm gonna be curious to see if that pass protection can keep it up against this Iowa front seven this weekend. If they can look like the way they did against Auburn, which also had a solid front seven. If they can do that too. I mean, I do like Penn State's chances in this one, and I would be very careful about thinking that the Sean Clifford that's coming into Iowa City this Saturday is the Sean Clifford circa 2020 or 2019. This is a different Sean Clifford than what Big Ten fans have been used to.
Yeah, absolutely, Tim. Sean has come a long way this year, and you know that the biggest difference is whenever his main guy isn't open or he feels some pressure, some heat, he doesn't tuck and run. He'll still use his legs to keep the play alive and to move around in the pocket, but he's finding other receivers, and we're seeing that this year with Penn State. We're seeing Parker Washington, who had a really good freshman year last year, but continued to have a big year as a result. Keandre Lambert-Smith has emerged as a big-time deep ball threat, big play threat, because Cliff is keeping plays alive, allowing him to find these guys. Check downs to the running backs this year, especially John Lovett in the passing game, has been big because of him taking those strides. And like you said, if a defense, they drop 6-7 guys in coverage and they get too far field on their pass rush, Cliff will still gladly tuck it, take 12 yards, take that easy first down and move the sticks. So I think I know we're really harping on it in the show, but I feel like anyone who's watched Penn State football the last 3 years will attest to it. Just he has grown so much, not just from last year, but even from 2019 Clifford, who was much better than 2020 Clifford. 2021 Clifford is head and shoulders above 2019 Clifford. This is a totally different Sean Clifford. And I think he is not just he's raised his floor and ceiling as a quarterback, and as a result has raised the ceiling of the 2021 Nittany Lions. And in my opinion, the play of Clifford combined with this defense has made them a legitimate college football playoff contender.
Mark, I don't want to change the subject, but there's a comment from Adam Wanch. Maybe we can address this in the chat. He says he doubts Iowa should be ranked. I hope that's a misprint from Adam. I know he's bringing it up from the Nebraska perspective. I hope that's a misprint. And I want to address real quickly here the resumes of these two teams. Mark, as I do every week, I pay close attention to your rankings. Your rankings are much better. I've said this before, much better than anything we see in the AP and coaches poll. And that shouldn't be, and nobody should perceive that as me sucking up to Mark, because the AP and the coaches poll are both total jokes. The fact that we base rankings off of preseason rankings, which are based off of, this idea you have about talent, and yet we still continue to let those original rankings influence us the entire year. And then we still allow our perception of team talent to influence us week in and week out. That's ridiculous. But as far as your rankings are concerned, I saw you go back and forth. I believe it was your Big Ten power rankings with Iowa and Penn State. One thing that I do, and I'd like to get Marty, your opinion, and Tim's opinion. Auburn struggled against Georgia State the week after. I believe it was a week after you guys beat them. Am I correct in saying that?
Mm-hmm.
Correct.
I don't want to play this game of comparing, because I mentioned how Iowa kind of struggled against Kent State and Colorado State, but I don't know much about LSU either. Obviously they're down, but I mean, was that at all concerning when you look back at the resume? And that's why I think Iowa's got a slightly better resume. It's because I think Auburn is overrated. Wisconsin is a dumpster fire right now offensively. What was your guys' opinions, I guess, on the Auburn close call with Georgia State?
I think it was, I think it was hangover effect rearing its ugly head. It'd be like if me, I'm in my late 30s, partied like I was back in my Penn State days. I would take me the entire next day to recover from it, probably. So I think it was partially that. I believe Bo Nix got knocked out of the game. I know TJ Finley was in there. I caught the final drive where they scored the go-ahead touchdown, but didn't really watch much of it. They did go on the road next week and beat LSU in Death Valley. I think they were from behind most of the game, and then took the lead in the final minute. Now, maybe LSU is not that good, and it sounds like Ed Orgeron could pull a Gene Chizik and get fired just 2 years after winning a national title where he caught lightning in the bottle. So I don't know about that, but just looking, I guess just trying to pull up Iowa's schedule here. I mean, obviously we beat Indiana, just like Penn State did. Won a road beat Iowa State, who, you could also just really say with Auburn and Wisconsin. I mean, turns out Iowa State isn't as hot as we thought they were.
Yeah, but my only issue with that is I agree they were probably overrated. And I guess you could make the argument that they almost lost to UNI week 1. I mean, if you look at the score, you could say that in comparing these wins. I don't know. Maybe there's some bias creeping into my opinion of this. I'm sure there is. But so Auburn, Indiana, who's the third win on Penn State's resume right now? The significant win.
Wisconsin.
Wisconsin. Oh, Wisconsin. Yeah.
Excuse me if I said the wrong team. Yeah, Wisconsin. So I don't know. To me, two of those three teams are significantly overrated. Well, maybe all three. I mean, Indiana, I don't give any credence to what Iowa did to Indiana week 1 because we've seen that. I mean, Western Kentucky probably should have beaten Indiana in that game. And now without Penix, they're going to be doing well to get to a bowl game, which is a sad thought for a team that was considered to be a competitor in the East Division this year. So, and you could be right. It could have been the hangover effect with Georgia State. This is a compliment to Penn State. The reason I wonder if that could have been the truth is Penn State's had so many whiteouts and so many big games in that stadium. It's not like Auburn was top 5. I mean, that I don't know why that should result in a hangover if you've got a mature team that takes one game at a time. And if that's the case, if they did have a bit of a hangover, that makes me. We're talking about Auburn. Excuse me, I said Penn State. If that's the case, they've been on the road for games like whiteouts numerous occasions. But if that's the case, that makes me question Auburn's maturity and their expertise in the field. I don't know. We'll see. I mean, I know again, Mark, you rated their resume slightly ahead of Iowa's. I may challenge that, but it doesn't really matter at this point. It probably doesn't matter.
Well, the to defend my rankings there was at one point in the season, even starting with week 1, if I remember correctly, ranking Iowa number 1 in the country, again, based on the resume, not based on who I believe is the best team in the country. The distinction that I made this week and what people don't, the major criticism that I get is that people think I'm ranking who I think are the best teams in the country. I'm not. I'm ranking resumes. So Oklahoma is the team that you alluded to as being the classic example of being overrated, and it continues to this day. If we put Oklahoma's results on any other team, practically any other team in the country, and assigned those results and those performances and said, this is the 5th or 6th rated team in the country, people would laugh and say, what are you talking about? But since we had that predetermined view of Oklahoma, then it's perfectly fine with people that they don't slip after they almost lose to Tulane. They almost lose to Nebraska. They almost lose to West Virginia. They almost lose to decent teams, marginal teams, decent teams. The distinction I made this week where I flipped and moved ahead with Penn State over Iowa was there's a constant reevaluation of the previous games.
Yeah.
And for me, Auburn went to LSU and won. No, I don't think that LSU is any kind of great team. I think they have great talent. And I think that they're a very talented team and could beat a lot of teams across America. They will, of course, have to play a brutal schedule and try to get through that. So Auburn improved in my perception. The Indiana game's a wash to me, much like what you guys stated. They both dominated in different ways, but really defensively. And Penn State did not struggle against their FCS/group of 5 opponents, and Iowa did to a large extent. And that was kind of a deciding factor. It's not just who you beat. To me, I also look at the performance.
Yeah, I mean, they did, in their defense, Mark, they did win both those, and they weren't FCS teams, but I get what you're saying. But they did win both of those games against Kent State, and against Colorado State by double digits. So I get what you're saying. They did struggle for a portion of those games, but they basically had those games firmly in hand by the fourth quarter.
The Colorado State game was
it was uncomfortable at
struggle.
halftime. I agree with you with that. I'll agree with I absolutely agree with there's no question that Iowa did struggle more in those games. I guess, and I don't want to stay on this topic forever, but I would right now, and maybe people would challenge me, especially given what we saw from Maryland on Friday. I think Maryland's better than Wisconsin right now. That may be up for debate. I think Maryland's better than Wisconsin, and I think Iowa State Auburn would be very close. But that's all. Again, that's just a guessing game too. We don't know what would happen, and matchups are huge and whatnot.
If I had to stake my mortgage right this second on a Wisconsin Maryland game, I just have to default to Wisconsin and their experience in big games and their defense. Now, I wouldn't be surprised if Maryland won the game.
Yeah,
not at all, because they could make a couple big plays on Wisconsin's defense, and the Badgers could struggle all night offensively and never be able to do anything.
They can't run the ball, and they have no quarterback to get the ball. I mean, so just like Iowa's defense and Wisconsin's defense will keep them in every game, Wisconsin's offense, I see them keeping the opposing team in every game.
Yeah.
So
the one thing that I think, and this will be my last comment on the subject, because I can talk this narrative forever, and we can make our way all the way across the country when we do the 8th degree.
Yes.
Part of this is, especially at this stage of the season, we're still early enough that it seems like every time I get challenged on a team, the question is, well, who have they beaten? And then if I mention that I think this team or these 3 teams are quality teams, well, who did they beat to be a quality team? Well, if it's this early in the season and you're already questioning on a win by the particular team over another team, well, that's already 1 out of 5 games that they've played that's a loss. And teams are playing FCS and group of 5 teams early. There aren't going to be that many data points that are going to impress anyone. Who really has a win in this country that every college football fan is going to say, oh, that was an amazing win? It's pretty much like Oregon beating Ohio State. Other than that, even Georgia beating Clemson, now people are, well, Clemson's no good. So everybody like defaults to that. They're garbage and everybody's flawed and nobody's any good. And
well, you're right. And I didn't mean to give that idea about Wisconsin. For the record, you're right. Penn State and Iowa have 2 of the best resumes in college football right now. Yep. That's just the fact. So I'm not trying to downplay what Penn State. You are really dancing a thin line because both these teams have excellent resumes. I do have a trivia question, if you will, Mark. If I can ask this question, and you can answer it because you're a savant as it relates to the Big Ten football, or Marty or Tim can answer this question. So based off of, and again, this is a mixed bag because of what we've seen. I think most people understood the stat early, but if you had to guess where Iowa stands in total offense, okay, so total yardage offensively in the Big Ten, where do they rank?
I'm going to write a number down.
I saw this earlier today.
Okay.
At least I believe so. If I remember correctly, I saw that they ranked last in the Big Ten in yards per game.
They rank last. Now, good job, Marty. Where does Iowa rank in points per game in the Big Ten? They rank last in total offense. Where do they rank in points per game?
Scored by their offense?
Or just scored in general. Yeah.
Well, I guess I don't. Maybe I'm wrong. That's how it's measured. I think it's measured just off of points.
It is.
So,
but I was just making the point.
Yeah. But no, well, that's part of what my point is, Mark. But where do you think Iowa ranks in points per game?
Well, they've scored 34, 27, 30 against Kent, and what was the other game? 51.
And so they hung a 50 burger on Maryland.
Third.
Any ideas where they rank in the Big Ten?
Second.
I would say no.
They rank 4th.
Okay.
They rank 4th. Now, again, you're right, Mark. A lot of those points have been scored by the defense, or a good portion of those points have been scored by the defense. A good portion of those points have been scored on short fields. But again, if you can make the argument, and I think you can now because we've seen it over the course of numerous games now, that the turnovers are, for a large part, sustainable, that's the stat that matters, Hawkeye fans. That's the stat that matters. If Iowa's putting up more points than the other team, they're going to win games. So I was really reading into the total offense early in the year too. But again, if you think about it, and I'm not saying Iowa's offense has been a world beater, but you take what the defense gives you. If your defense is consistently putting you at your opponent's 20, then you drive 20 yards for 7 points. I mean, and that counts against your numbers, I guess, if you're ranking, you're comparing them to other Big Ten teams, but that's still the stat that matters. So this past week made me a bit more of a believer in the offense. And not only that, but we also saw a big jump. And this is also, I give you credit, Mark. You predicted back in the spring that Spencer Petras would be one of the more underrated quarterbacks, would make a big jump, I believe. I could be wrong. Maybe you're going to tell me I'm wrong. But you kind of
No,
had
I'll
him
take credit for that. Sure.
as an underrated guy. And early on this year, that prediction was not looking good. But man, the guy looks like a different guy. At least he's two games. I mean, I wasn't a believer after Colorado State because it's Colorado State, but these last 2 games, he has looked like a different quarterback. So I'm a bit on the bandwagon right now with Spencer, and that along with, again, what the defense has been able to do to get Iowa's offense in such a great position consistently. I'm not that worried about Iowa's offense. I do think it's going to be a low-scoring game because Penn State's defense is legit.
Well, I would like to be able to say that I had scouted Spencer Petras and his throwing motion, and I determined X, Y, and Z would happen. But I tend to, when I make predictions like that, base it on probabilities and based on what I've seen before, and put together the player, the scheme, the coaching staff, the program, the year 1 to year 2 improvement, the year 1 improvement during the season, and will that continue after a full weight and conditioning program, spring, summer, individual workouts, the whole deal. So I play to the probabilities is what I typically do when I make those predictions.
Well, I did not make that prediction preseason because I very, very rarely, I shouldn't say never, I very, very rarely in my lifetime have ever called for a quarterback to be benched, including when Ricky Stanzi threw 5 picks against Indiana in 2009. Most fans, and it makes sense why, they were calling for him to be benched. He came back, won the game. But I was at one point last year calling for Spencer to be benched. Not done that since then, or since really the Illinois win last year, because I think ever since then, and again, these first 2 games, I think that's one thing people have to realize. Iowa State's defense is still really good. I know they lost to Baylor. If you look at their defensive numbers, they are pretty darn good nationally. And then Indiana, I mean, their defense is holding its own right now. I mean, Cincinnati, I don't know how many points they gave up against Cincinnati, but I mean, a lot of those points against Iowa, again, were defensive points. And for an explosive offense that Penn State has, 24 points when you're playing from behind the entire game, I feel like that's impressive. So I think those first 2 games were a lot to do with Spencer Petras struggling. I do think I don't know what Penn State, I know last year or 2 years ago when Iowa played Penn State, Tim, Iowa had problems protecting Nate Stanley because Robert Windsor was just destroying Iowa's interior time and time again. 1 week after Don Brown's Michigan defense did the same thing. So that's better this year. I think Iowa will protect better. I don't know. I know they don't have Robert Windsor anymore, but that will be key. That Iowa's in the interior of Iowa's line is obviously a lot better than 2 years ago, and they held up well last year as well. Of course, again, COVID year, so you can kind of throw some of that out. But what I guess from Marty or Tim, as far as or Penn State's defensive line, I think that will be key. I do believe Iowa will be able to protect Petras, but what does PSU's defensive line look like as far as pass rushing?
Well, I guess a name you may want to remember for Saturday is Arnold Ebiketie. He is a Temple grad transfer from Temple, and he's easily the best addition Penn State has ever made from the transfer portal. Just an absolute beast off the edge. He blocked a field goal against Wisconsin, the season opener. And he does a great job of just shedding blockers, just getting pressure on the quarterback. He's garnered a few sacks already this season. I remember he got a nice sack on Jack Tuttle right after he came in to replace an injured Michael Penix, and the crowd just erupted. I mean, he's a guy who can make those kind of game changing, momentum changing type plays that will get the rest of the defense fired up. On the other side, you got Nick Tarbird coming off the edge. Adisa Isaac, guy who was expected to start there, got injured in the preseason and is out for the year. So Tarbird has stepped up, as a guy look out for. In the interior side, you've got PJ Mustipher and Devon Elliott. This other Devon Elliott has been stepping up lately as well. I'm sure Marty, you can add a little bit to that if you want.
Yeah, I mean, obviously it starts with AK, Arnold Bakade. I have his stats here so far this year. He already has 3 sacks, 5.5 tackles for a loss. And I think anyone who's watched Penn State would agree with me. It feels like he has a lot more than that because he's constantly in the backfield, constantly harping on the quarterback, constantly building plays up. And one other guy on the defensive line definitely want to watch, I think, is Jesse Luketa. He moved from Mike linebacker now to defensive end this season, and largely because of the Isaac injury. And Luketa he's been a godsend at defensive end. He doesn't have a sack this year, which really surprised me. I thought for sure he would. Because, again, he's a guy like Abakade. I feel like if you watch the games, Luketa's always blowing plays up in the backfield. He's got 3 tackles for loss. But I think that combination of AK and Luketa off the edge are going to be difficult for any team to handle. Tarburton's a guy I've always liked, too. He's finally healthy, playing well. And at least in the interior, PJ Mustipher is playing at an all Big Ten level. Devon Ellis has looked good. And Derek Tangelo has really, another grad transfer who came in from Duke, has really raised the level of this Penn State defensive line as well. And I think one other guy to watch in the pass rush non-defensive line is linebacker Brandon Smith, who's playing at an All-American level, in my opinion.
Yeah. And Iowa fans are familiar. Yeah, he is partially Iowa fans are familiar with him because he shares the name of one of Iowa's best receivers last year, Brandon Smith. But yeah, no, there's no question. That's one thing that I think heading into this game that I am not comfortable with still with Spencer is his ability to step up in the pocket, make a play, and maybe take a hit. Again, I think back to 2019 and Nate Stanley's issues. Of course, that was obviously an offensive line issue, but he had the innate ability, no pun intended, innate, if you didn't catch it. He had the innate ability to basically have guys hanging off Nate Stanley as he threw. He, for being a big guy, had a nice spin move out of the pocket. Spencer Petras drops like a fly on a moment's notice. So if there is any pressure, that pocket collapses. I don't have faith in Spencer getting out of the pocket, although he's improved getting out of the pocket early, but when he's under pressure, he is very limited. He's one of the few quarterbacks in college football now, especially in the Big Ten. He's one of the few quarterbacks that is a statue. And that's just what I would, CJ Beathard was semi-mobile, but before CJ it was probably Brad Banks would be the last guy that was real mobile at Iowa as a quarterback. Drew Tate was okay. So that will be a factor if Iowa is not able to protect Spencer. And we saw it in the Iowa State game, taking sacks at bad times. I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt that he's corrected that error. But, man, that almost killed Iowa in the game. It took points off the board because, you're at the 30, 35-yard line repeatedly taking sacks on 3rd and long. So you hope Spencer's learned from that if you're an Iowa fan. But certainly and I said it last week against Maryland. Maryland wasn't able to do it, but I said that was a big key. If you get him into 3rd and long and you can get pressure on Iowa, which, again, Don Brown has done it, Penn State's done it, confuse Iowa's blockers up front, that's going to be another big part of this game if Spencer Petras can react in a way that, again, is not going to cost his offense.
I'd like to hit on a couple things. I don't know where you guys stand on time. I certainly want to respect your time, so you guys duck out at whatever point you need to. Iowa, a 2.5-point favorite at home against Penn State. I really only have one other question, but I would like to transition to one question that was in the live chat prominently, because I think this has been a Penn State issue for a few years since they've been prominent here in the Big Ten, and that's the offensive line and how it's going to hold up against Iowa.
I guess, yeah. Well, I think I might have mentioned it earlier, but the biggest issue of the O-line right now has been the interior. especially when it comes to run blocking. And that's something, Penn State I noticed against Indiana, especially once they got up like a couple touchdowns, they were really trying to establish the run game. And, they did have more success than they did in that putrid performance against Villanova the week before. But it's just another big thing that concerns me. And obviously, Iowa, but just, looking ahead in the schedule against, Ohio State, Michigan State, maybe it's going to come down to a point where they're going to have to convert a 3rd and short, 3rd and 1, 3rd and 2, or, either because they're, just for whatever reason, maybe they're trying to run the clock out. They just need to pick up a couple yards, just smash it with Kevon Lee or whoever, but they have not been able to do that, at least not on a consistent basis. And geez, I mean, the Indiana's goal line stand when it looked like Penn State was going to go up 28-zip. I mean, they had like 4th and goal, like inside the 1. Kevon Lee, I mean, I guess that time I can't blame the O-line too much. Kevon Lee should have cut inside and would have found the end zone. But it's just been it's just kind of been a recurring theme throughout the year. The inability to just pick up those 1 or 2 yards to keep a drive going. And, obviously it's certainly something that, that they cleaned up a little bit last weekend, but, they're really going to get tested in that regards against Iowa.
Just like I could see Iowa, I could envision a scenario where Iowa is going to have to win without any semblance of a run game. Penn State fans, to me, should be absolutely ready for that. I mean, that you guys are going to have to win without a run game, because if it's struggling against the likes of Indiana, Auburn, and whoever else I played, I mean, Iowa's run defense is obviously one of the best in the country, and they shut down. I mean, if Breece Hall wasn't able to run against Iowa and Fleet Davis wasn't able to run against Iowa, will Noah Cain be able to run against Iowa? I believe Noah is healthy right now, right? I mean, that's
no,
is he still not 100%?
Yeah,
he didn't look anywhere near 100%.
Yeah, he hasn't looked 100% all season.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, I think now if I was to base my predictions off of, okay, who has the ability to get the ball downfield, that's just, if that is the only scenario we're looking at, and it's not, because you've got special teams and certainly turnovers make a huge difference. But if that was the only scenario I'm looking at take Penn State, no question. However, there is still that glimmer of hope from Iowa fans that Spencer has shown the ability to throw the ball deep. So that's kind of put me over the edge as far as my outlook on this game. But I think we could very easily see, and may not be this way, but very easily could see this game where both teams, neither team breaks 60 yards rushing when you factor in sacks. I mean, very easily. And that's going to basically play into the typical Iowa Penn State history of these low scoring games that come down again to, can someone hit on an explosive play? Did someone create a crucial turnover at a big time? Special teams. Another game we didn't talk about, guys. And obviously I'm excited about this, or happy about that. I kind of, this game was sort of what got me amped for Iowa football back in 2008. And that was that Iowa Penn State game with Sean Green. It doesn't look like Marty really has great memories of that game, but man, what a game.
I mean, you say what a game, like, no.
I know it was a killer. It was a killer. It kept Penn State out of the national title that year, didn't it?
Yep.
Yeah.
So
the story I always tell with that game, I had a cousin who got married that day, and I've never seen a wedding reception so freaking depressed as it was following that field goal. It went from riding that high of wedding day to just crash and burn. It was terrible.
Yeah, that I remember that game like it was yesterday. When one of my favorite Iowa players of all time, just because of not only his play on the field, but his story, and then of course his tragic death, was Tyler Sash. He had a huge interception late in that game that got Iowa the ball back. Of course, Brett Greenwood is another tremendous story, played in that game at safety for Iowa. I know there's a lot of controversy around what happened with Darrell Johnson-Coulianos at Iowa, but he, was on that team. Marvin McNutt, Sean Green, Ricky Stanzi, and of course Claiborne and all those guys. And I think that might be Iowa's. That's probably If you want to put this team this year for Iowa in the conversation of best team in the last 12 to 15 years, that would be the other team that I would rank up there because talent-wise, it was right there. And, of course, Stanzi went down and changed things. But, man, that game was awesome. Daniel Murray with the kick. Crowd storms the field. They got to get the fans off because there was still a second remaining. Joe Pa, I remember he was up in the – I don't know why, but he was up in the press box, I believe, and he normally was on the side.
You got hit on the sideline, right?
I don't remember if he was on the – there was, I think, the week before or 2 weeks ago, before that against Ohio State, he was up in the box. I think he had some –
The sideline hit was a year or two later. I think that was like 2010-ish.
Because I remember 2010, the rainy game. I remember his glasses getting all foggy and wet. So he was on the field the very next year against Iowa. But 2008, I remember them ushering him out of the press box.
Yeah, he was probably up in the booth for that one. I'll tell you what else I remember. Not going to rehash the field goal part, of course, but just the game itself. And I'll say the difference is at least James Franklin won't refuse to use heaters on the sidelines if it's cold this Saturday, which I don't think it will be. But
it's gonna be like 80 down there this Saturday. Well, 3 o'clock.
That
Maybe
game
like 80.
was like November. It was cold. I just remember for some dumb reason, like Joe refused to have heaters on the sidelines for the players. So I just remember you see like the Iowa players in the sidelines, they're warming up their hands. Meanwhile the Penn State guys are just like, huddling, just shivering. But I digress.
Well, when Joe Pa started coaching, 1951, and took over Penn State in 66, there were no heaters. So, if it wasn't, we didn't need them back then. We don't need them now.
Let me just say this about Saturday's weather. And I'm looking at the Weather Channel right now. 33% chance of showers late, but the daytime high is 83. Now, when's the last time we've been able to say an Iowa-Penn State game? I don't know what the temperature was in Happy Valley last year, but, man, normally it's cold, it's rainy. So that will be a factor. This should be, again, chance of rain. Knowing this rivalry, it probably will rain. That game in 2010, man, Tom and I were talking about that last night. There were just sheets of rain coming down in that game. I mean, it was ridiculous the entire game. I think at least until the fourth quarter. So that shouldn't be a factor. There's a lot of great storylines. I think one thing that's another check mark, at least for Iowa fans who are worried because this has been a one-sided rivalry since 2010, and it has been, is Iowa did win last year. I know it was a COVID year, but to me, to win on the road at Penn State, even with the weird year, obviously most of these guys play in that game. So there's got to be a level of belief by just doing it, whether it was a weird year or not. And I wonder if that was there prior because they hadn't done it since 2010. So that's a factor as well. And then the big noon kickoff, we didn't talk about that. Of course, game day passed up this game, but is there some level of distraction with the home team hosting that? I don't buy into that with Iowa. I guess it's possible. You got Bob Stoops there and the whole crew. So, and just the fact that this is the biggest game for Iowa regular season wise, if you look at the numbers since 1985, all those things play into this, Mark.
One quick thing I will throw out there about the weather. I guess it's just fitting because Penn State, Iowa, and where stuff like this happens, you said 80 something degrees on Saturday. I live about an hour and 15 minutes from Beaver Stadium, and Saturday afternoon is supposed to be 53 with rain here. So if it were in Happy Valley, the weather conditions probably would be a much bigger impact and much more of what you expect.
Yeah, the
Big
Ten schedulers clearly screwed up.
Yeah,
the game was supposed to be
53 and 70% chance of rain. That's Big Ten football, baby, not 85 degrees. Get it right. Come on now.
Yeah, one more note. I just want to bring this up. Jovan Johnson, he's been a guest on my show before. I don't know if you remember Jovan, Mark, but he was an all Big Ten cornerback. I want to say 2005, 2004, somewhere in that time frame. So he's good friends with Terry Roberts, who is the guy that I mentioned. He's not a starter on this in this defensive backfield, but he probably would be. They have been playing more and more dime defense, if you will. I mean, Iowa's version of the nickel is what they call cash, which is not, Don. And again, I'm not trying to say I know more about anything football related than Don, but Don considers the cash a nickel defense, and I guess it is technically, but Iowa's 4-2-5, you send in Dane Belton, who's more of a hybrid safety, to play that spot, that next defensive back on the field. They have went more, and not a lot, but they have went more with Terry Roberts and Belton on the field at the same time. Terry Roberts is an Erie, Pennsylvania native. So I always like, when there's Iowa gets very few guys out of Pennsylvania. So, that would be cool to see him get some meaningful snaps on Saturday. And again, with Penn State's ability to get the ball downfield. And of course, injuries are always a possibility. You hate to think that Iowa's going to deal with any catastrophic injuries in the defense, but that'll be an interesting story. I do remember in 2018, Geno Stone, who was also a Pennsylvania native, had the big pick six in that game that put Iowa back in that game.
Yeah, still. I mean, I think a lot of Penn State fans would agree with me. Geno Stone, late in his recruitment, was under the impression that Penn State offer was coming, and never did. Yeah, and that's still one of those things. Like, those Penn State teams of 17 and 18 and 19, how good they were. If you would have had Geno Stone, especially if the safety play was kind of poor this season, who knows? It's just one of those.
He's a good football player.
Penn State, because I know Terry Smith, who's the defensive backs coach, wanted to pull the trigger on the offer and just never got that green light. So that is one that I think kind of always sits with Penn State fans.
Yeah, and I believe he's playing in Baltimore now.
Correct,
that was
with the Ravens.
Yeah. So
I have one last question that I think all of three of you, I'm guessing, will want to chime in on. And before that, I need to be a better promotions guy for my own channels here and our own product, because all three of these guys are involved in Voice of College Football post-game shows. So take your choice, whether you root for Penn State or root for Iowa. Marty and Tim, of course, we'll have our Penn State post-game following the big game against the Hawkeyes at Kinnick Stadium. And that will be on the Penn State channel. And I believe the Big Ten channel, we'll have to work that out in regards to what we're going to do there. But we definitely want to make these shows as available to you as possible. But it's good reminder to head on over, whether you love Penn State football or just want to keep up with the big brands in the Big Ten, and you just want to support the Penn State channel and get over there for the content that we provide, and certainly Tim and Marty's post-game show. Or if you're just looking to help us grow the channels and the product and the platforms, and I just admonish you to go over to any of the channels and subscribe to the ones that are especially under 1,000 subscribers. That's key. So get on over to those channels. And then I certainly have communicated this many times. Once we get well over 1,000, hey, if you want to unsubscribe, you've done your work for us. We appreciate it. So thank you for that. So Tim and Marty after the game on the Penn State channel and the Big Ten channel. So catch them right there. And we may throw one of these shows on the main channel as well. I have yet to work on the post-game schedule involving the 16 or 17 shows coming up this Saturday.
Mark, it's just got to be the team that wins, right? You can always wait.
Wins. We could do that. Yes.
So it's your channel. You do what you want, Mark.
we can do that. So, and without further delay, of course, Corey from the Hawkeye of the Storm will host our coverage of Iowa's post-game version after the Penn State game with Coach Don Patterson. They do an amazing job as well. So I appreciate these three and the hand that they've had in helping us grow our platforms. Okay, so my final question is this. If we just look at recruiting rankings, Penn State's a better football team. Penn State has built it in such a way that they have certainly been the challenger to Ohio State in the conference over the past 4 or 5 years. They have played the games versus Ohio State closer than anybody else in the conference. Of course, Iowa doesn't get that opportunity on a yearly basis, and of course, the Hawkeyes easily took down the Buckeyes the last time they met in Iowa City. But zeroing in on this year. A lot of football left to be played against the better teams in the conference, but are we looking at the two best teams in the Big Ten?
No. In my opinion.
Why would that be, and who would that be?
I think Ohio State's still one of the two best teams in the country, and I don't know. I mean, this game may determine who is number two. But I still believe Ohio State will end up in the Big Ten title game. I hope I'm wrong. I mean, I don't like Ohio State, and I saw a couple comments about Urban Meyer. I guess we don't have to bring up his name given what he's dealing with right now, Mark.
Folks.
But
we don't. We really don't.
But no, I think Ohio State's still one of the best two teams, and I don't want to see Ohio State in the Big Ten title game because right now there's no question. I really hate saying this because it kind of makes me want to soil myself. Iowa's the clear favorite to win the West. I mean, there's just no. They're clearly the favorite to win the West, and we haven't said that this early in the season ever.
I think they've locked it up, Corey. It seems like.
Yeah, I've heard fans say that, and let's pump the brakes on that because I'm starting to say it myself, and it's just like, you know, a lot of games left in the schedule. But I don't believe. I think Ohio State and then whoever wins this game would be my top two. Probably don't want to disrespect Michigan because they haven't lost yet. You know, Michigan State. I don't think they're probably going to be able to compete for that division. I guess your guys' thoughts on top two teams.
I mean, as long as Ohio State's still, I mean, of course, Ohio State looking like they might be now. Okay, caveat that it's Rutgers, albeit maybe an improved Rutgers. Still, Ohio State looks like they kind of look like, you know, some past Ohio State seasons where they struggled in September, had an early season upset loss at home. But then October rolls around, you know, they're starting to look more competent, like, you know, more well-oiled machine that everyone thought they would be beginning of this season. And then by late October, going to November, you know, they're picking up steam. And, you know, what do you know? October 30th, Penn State travels to Columbus to face Ohio State. So, I mean, in Iowa, to me, they look like the clear-cut best team in the West. I mean, I don't want to jinx it, but just looking at the standings and looking at how the rest of the West has performed, you know, especially Wisconsin, who is, I think, the preseason favorite to win the Big Ten West. I mean, I don't know who surpasses them out West. To me, the East, I think it feels to me like I know Michigan State's unbeaten, but I think they're gonna drop a few towards, you know, once they get into the real meat of their schedule. Once they have to face Michigan, Ohio State, Penn State, that gauntlet. But I think it's going to come down. I think, you know, for second best team in the Big Ten, I mean, I'd still say Ohio State's probably the best until it's proven otherwise. If, you know, Penn State or Michigan can dethrone them. But, you know, I think between Penn State, Iowa, and maybe Michigan, I mean, probably one of those is the second best team in the entire Big Ten. But I think that's going to be sorted out over this next month.
I mean, yeah, I 100% agree. I hope Ohio State is not in the Big Ten championship game, because if they are, that means Penn State isn't. But yeah, I think until they're dethroned, you have to consider the Buckeyes the best team in the conference. Now, that said, I think Penn State and Iowa both have been better teams and have played better so far this season than Ohio State has, but it all depends what happens on the field. Am I going to be surprised if Penn State goes into Columbus at the end of the month and beats the Buckeyes? Absolutely not, for a lot of reasons. But I think whoever wins this game definitely solidifies themselves with the Buckeyes as top two team in the conference. And, you know, I think if you're Iowa looking at this game, I kind of go back and forth in this, where if you're Penn State and you lose, you still, everything's in front of you. You went out, you're going to Indianapolis. And Iowa's kind of in that same boat, but I feel, to me at least, Iowa, from a perspective standpoint, if this makes sense, kind of needs this more to solidify themselves as the number two team in the Big Ten, largely because Penn State has Ohio State coming up in a couple weeks. Where if Penn State loses this game and then they come out at the end of the month and they beat Ohio State, they're still there. They're going to shoot back into the top four and put themselves in that position to win out and go to the playoff. Where if you're Iowa and you lose this game, I think you could see them fall further in the perception ranks, right or wrong, than you would with Penn State, largely because of the remaining schedule. But yeah, I definitely think whoever wins this game definitely cements themselves at worst as the second best team in the Big Ten.
I can agree with that as far as perception, the game means more to Iowa because, again, you're right. Iowa doesn't have Ohio State in the schedule. A couple things. Let's not forget that Ohio State's got one loss. It was out of the conference, and it was to a top 10 Oregon team. There's that. I know it was at home. I mean, let's be honest. I don't think any of us could say confidently that we think Iowa or Penn State would beat Rutgers by like 50 if they played tomorrow.
No.
You know, and I'm not changing my opinion based on that game, but that was sort of just indicative. I think they're going to figure things out. They're figuring things out. Of course, they'll have to play better competition to see if that's true. But the other thing I was going to say, Marty, is as it relates to perception, I'm not saying that. I did say earlier in the week, we talked to Don about this. When is it valid to start talking about Iowa in the playoff conversation? It's not valid right now. Anybody wants to say it is, we're 5 weeks into the year. But if Iowa beats Penn State this weekend, I believe that it becomes valid. It becomes a valid conversation, but there's no reason to even have the conversation until then, in my opinion. But if we're not talking about, I mean, I went into this year, I made the prediction Iowa would win the West. I didn't make any predictions about the playoff. And obviously, you want to make the playoff. There's no question about it. But as far as the West is concerned, this game is not vital for Iowa, as we talked about. It's a Big Ten game. I get it. They're all important, but it's less important than the next 6 games in the schedule because those are against West teams. That's the first thing. And the second thing is Iowa's already got a 2-game lead on Wisconsin. Purdue's got a loss now, but do we really believe Purdue or Minnesota or Illinois or even Nebraska, they're going to be there at the end? It's going to be probably a 2-dog race between Iowa and Wisconsin. So they've already got that lead there. You can afford, I don't want to say you can afford loss because that sounds like it doesn't matter, but for the West, this is not a deal-breaking game. I am, again, I said it earlier, I'm more confident in Iowa winning this game than I was Iowa beating Maryland last week. I compared this game, though, to how I go into every Iowa State game. I go into Cyhawk games extremely nervous every year because I hate losing to Iowa State. It's just the worst thing you can do is losing to Iowa State. But I go into a game like this, I respect the heck out of Penn State. I mean, I don't respect what happened under Joe Pa with Penn State, but I respect the current staff. I'm not a big James Franklin fan, and we didn't talk about him very much tonight, but this game does not scare me from, I hate losing this game. This is an opportunity for Iowa. So I get excited for a game like this. This is an opportunity for Iowa, and it's an opportunity for Penn State, but especially Iowa, given they haven't been on this stage as much as Penn State has in the past 20 years. It's an opportunity for them to make their case for the playoff. And if they don't, the West is still there. And honestly, the playoff is technically still alive. I mean, I think we'd all agree if Iowa goes 12-1 with a loss to Penn State in October, probably still in. I mean, if it means beating Penn State again, in a rematch in the championship game or in Ohio State or in Michigan. So I don't believe it's a deal breaker. I get what you're saying though, Marty, that it's probably more important playoff wise for Iowa. It's not a deal breaker, but it's more important playoff wise because Iowa does not have Ohio State in the schedule. And I don't want to change the subject. I know we're trying to wind this thing down, Mark, but can we address real quickly? I did have a question for you two Penn State guys. I know this has been around since the Clay Helton firing. Is there any at all thought that at some point the rumors about James Franklin and USC, I don't know how strong those are in Happy Valley right now, but is there any chance at some point those could eke into the locker room and start becoming a distraction? Because they're just these reports. Let's be honest, guys. These reports happen every single year. He's the guy. Matt Campbell, it happens here in Ames as well. But the difference is Matt Campbell dispels these right away. And I don't know if maybe James Franklin is, and I'm not hearing that. But what are your guys' thoughts on that, I guess?
In terms of locker room stuff, I'm not concerned at all. Actually, when Clay Helton was fired, James got out in front of with the team. He called a meeting immediately with the leadership council, which is basically the captains and the seniors, addressed it with them, addressed it with the rest of the team. The team basically said, hey, we're focused on Penn State football. We're focused on us. Coach Franklin's focused on it. And they came out and beat Auburn. Now, I will say, I think one thing James does magnificently is manipulate this kind of stuff in the media to get money out of the university for assistant coaches, for facilities, all of this stuff. he and Trace Armstrong, his agent, are master manipulators at that. But at the same time, when it comes to players, when it comes to recruits, when it comes to families, he shuts this stuff down behind closed doors by all accounts. So that is not something that I think is a concern of causing any sort of locker room issues or anything of the nature.
Yeah, Marty pretty much hit on it. I'll just say, I know we sometimes mock the term sources, but a source that I trust, say a guy who knows a guy in the program, he had told me that Franklin isn't going anywhere, and plus, Marty said about how he addressed the leadership council. The week that the help got fired and all those media talking heads were harping James Franklin and USC. That same week was when they went out and beat Auburn in the whiteout, and then it's died down since. There haven't been any real leaks, and I see as a comment, Franklin would be smart to go to USC. I mean, frankly, I do agree with that. USC, I mean, that's a mess right now. Not just in the pro, but administratively, they're getting their stuff together. I mean, I know they've got a new president, new athletic director recently. So they're just getting their ducks in a row. The thing is, Franklin, when he came to Penn State, now Bill O'Brien had in his 2 years there did a tremendous. I cannot state enough what a tremendous job he and of course the guys in the 2012 team did to keep that program afloat when it was in danger of complete collapse after the NCAA sanctions. But nonetheless, by the time Franklin got there, they were, even though some of the sanctions have been lifted, and then right before the beginning of his first season, all of them were lifted, they were still playing at a serious scholarship limit. The university was currently was at the point paying off the fines, related to this, Sandusky scandal. And, so financially it was a mess too. It was still a mess. I mean, even the sanctions were cleared away before during his first season, it was still a mess. And it took him years. I mean, in the first two seasons, Marty, I mean, you remember too. I mean, it was not looking, it did not go well. Going into that 2016 season, I don't know if I don't know if he was truly on the hot seat, but another rough start. They were 2-2 after September, including they got walloped at Michigan.
By Michigan, yeah,
absolutely whacked. I was in a wedding when that was going on, thankfully, so I missed most of it. But it was, I just remember how dire things looked, and then the following week he goes out and they win that game in overtime against Minnesota, and then go on to upset Ohio State, and then just magical Big Ten championship. But anyway, from there he gradually over time he was able to use his success to get leverage with the athletic departments, to get more money for assistants, for facilities, and now he's finally at a point where he's able to get top-notch assistants like Mike Yursich coaching, running the offensive show, or you get guys like Phil Troutwine coaching the offensive line, who did a tremendous job at Boston College. Jaywan Sider, who's been a godsend as far as Florida recruiting is concerned. The running backs coach. It's been tremendous recruiting running backs for the program too. They got a couple studs coming in next year, but he's got Penn State at a point now where, I mean, he's this is creation. This is what he's. And it finally seems like after last year, this year it's been an incredible turnaround. He's got the number one rated recruiting class currently for 2022. Now it's not going to stay number one, but it's going to be a top 10 class all said and done. That includes a stud quarterback, Drew Aller, coming in, who he may finally be that missing piece. The one thing that about Penn State in years past. Like they've had some great skilled players, but one thing I was missing, and there's no disrespect to Sean Clifford or Trace McSorley before him, but having that truly elite quarterback, it's the one thing that might put them over the top, get them into the playoff. And, he might finally have got that guy and Drew Aller coming in next year. So I don't know why he would want to leave all this and go to USC, which is a mess right now. Now, granted, I think if USC was, say, in a better position and he did go there, I think he would absolutely crush it out there with his recruiting ability. He would make sure to hire guys who had California ties, West Coast ties. I'm sure he would do well. And plus, he went to face Ohio State every year. But I don't see him going into that mess at USC. And I'm going to get ahead of this because I have a feeling Coach O is going to get fired at LSU by the end of the year. I don't think he's going to end up at LSU either. Really, there's only three. I can think of only three jobs that would truly scare me with regards to Franklin leaving if they opened up. Clemson, Georgia, and Alabama. And right now, I don't see any of those three opening up anytime soon. So, and it doesn't seem like it's even been a distraction for the team, which Marty's alluded to. So I know it's a very super long-winded answer, went off a bunch of tangents, but no, I'm not worried about Franklin bolting.
Just real quickly, Kevin Downey in the chat a while back made a comment, and I want to call this comment out real quick. Don't often do this, but I'll call you out, Kevin. He said, you can't put Iowa in the playoff discussion until they have a couple marquee wins on the road. They beat Iowa State on the road. They beat Maryland on the road. Like, what are we looking for? Do they have to beat Ohio State on the road? Because I guarantee you, when they beat Wisconsin on the road, people are, oh, Wisconsin's down. That means nothing. They beat Iowa State and Maryland on the road, minus maybe Oregon, who has better road wins in college football right now than Iowa collectively.
Nobody.
So I don't believe they have to win any more on the road. They have to beat Penn State. They have to beat Penn State Saturday, and then they're in the playoff conversation.
It's funny because Corey, that all you guys have conversations with college football fans every day. So I'm not the only one, but because of what I have here, just the conversations and the comments that ensue all the time. Basically, the bar for a quality win by most college football fans, I've broken it down by math. I've collected a ton of comments and then said, I'm going to transition this to the math. Basically, the teams that you consider to be a quality win, those teams never lose any games. So there aren't any quality, like you got to be like Ohio State or Clemson for anyone to acknowledge that that's a quality win, and they win 90% of their games. So there are basically no quality wins in college football.
Mark, you see that record there,
fans.
that record you put up there. James Franklin, since his first 29 games, he's 50-14. So add 1 to that 50, and that was the score of the Maryland game. Okay, 51-14 on the road at Maryland, and a double-digit win at Iowa State. And it wasn't a 10-point. It was 10 points late, but it was a 3-score game for the majority of that fourth quarter. So I will give them the credit. I get Iowa State is down. Well, down. They're not what we thought they were most likely, but I still think they're going to be in the Big 12 championship game. And I think, obviously, Maryland, if you're judging them off one loss, okay. I don't know how we can say Maryland's a joke based off one loss, and it was to Iowa, especially if you're an Iowa fan. Like, why would you downplay, I've never understood this is going off on a tangent, Mark. I've never understood, this happens more at college basketball games. Overrated. What are you doing? You just beat a team, and now you're downplaying your opponent. You're making your win look worse. Like, sometimes student bodies can be so stupid at games. I mean, I've never understood that, but I know
that is my James Franklin statistic of the night. As Tim and Marty outlined, 1-2 to start that 2016 season after 2 7-6 seasons. It wasn't looking too good at that point. And then suddenly, bam, they turned it around on a dime. And I remember that game in Happy Valley against Minnesota, yes, where they pulled it out. It was hanging by a thread to go to 1-3 or probably 2-3 at that point. And then just a few weeks later, they're beating the number 2 team in the country when that didn't look possible as a 17-point underdog. And even though they had played a heck of a game, it looked like they were going to come up short. And then, boom, the special teams play, and they're off to the races, beat Wisconsin, go to the Rose Bowl against USC. And ever since, they have been the chief challenger to Ohio State by far. It's not even debatable in terms of playing Ohio State, the toughest, and being that marquee team in the Big Ten. Good stuff, guys. Again, I want to encourage everybody to head on over and catch these guys. We got Marty Leap and we got Tim Maiden and Black Shoe Diaries. They do an amazing job there at SB Nation covering Penn State football. Sure, they will have their predictions there. I think you guys post those on what, Thursday or Friday?
Go Friday morning.
Friday morning, the prediction roundtable goes up. So,
and they will anchor our post game here at the Voice of College Football following Penn State, Iowa. On the Penn State side, on the Iowa side, of course, we got Corey Bratta from the Hawkeye of the Storm and Coach Don Patterson. The insight is incredible there on Iowa football, and we post Iowa content on a regular basis on the Iowa channel. And again, from the Hawkeye of the Storm, both on video on YouTube and also on your favorite audio platform as well. Guys, this has been great. I appreciate you giving so much time up, and it's been a great discussion on Big Ten football.
Yeah, thanks for having us, Mark. Good chatting with everyone.
And we'll catch everyone soon. Keep locked in on those notifications to know when we go live and drop new content, and we will do that very soon here at the Voice of College Football.